Next, we want to start working on bringing over the excluding child nutrition per pupil expenditure information. So if you're 100% confident that the two data sets line up appropriately, meaning that each row is the same in each column, it's possible to just copy those columns over directly. But sometimes you might be unsure whether that's the case, and other times you might have one table that actually has more data than the other table. And so we'll use the VLookup to do this matching. The first thing I'm going to do is copy over my heading titles to my new to where I'm going to include the new information. I'm going to delete the ranking columns and just have the actual PPE information. I need to change each of these to say excluding child nutrition, because that's the data we're going to bring over from table 25 using our VLookup function. And so we've talked about that each LEA has a unique number associated with it. And so we're going to use that to match table 24 and 25. And again, this is an important thing, making sure your data has a high level of quality and is very accurate in order to do this matching. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to tell Excel and everything. We have to tell Excel everything. It doesn't know anything on its own. We want to tell Excel we want to go and find the LEA number. We want it to go to table 25. When it finds that number, we want it to tell us the state per pupil expenditure, then the federal, then the local, then the total. And we'll use VLookup to do this. So the way we set up a VLookup, we use the function VLookup, and we start the parentheses. And we want it to go and look up the LEA number. So this is in column B, and we can start with the first one. And we'll see at the end, we'll be able to, because we're selecting the cell as the reference, when we drag it down through the column, it will apply to all the rest of the cells we're looking for. So we want to go find the LEA number. We want it to go to table 25. So we're going to select our table 25 worksheet. The first column must be the column we're matching. So we're going to select column B as our first column and drag it over to K. So it's going to come to this table, find the appropriate LEA number, and then match with it the appropriate value we want. The way we tell it how far over to go in this table is by the number of columns. The first column is the first one we selected, so column B is the first one. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3 columns over to get to the state per pupil expenditures. So comma 3. And generally, if you have high quality data and you don't want Excel to do any guessing for you, we want to tell it false is our last term, and that means we want an exact match. So we want the LEA number to match exactly, not just an approximate match. And so now we have a state per pupil expenditure excluding child nutrition of $5,393.66. And that compares to the state PPE including child nutrition of $5,397.36. And in the bottom right of the selected cell, if we double click on that box, it will automatically carry that formula to the end of our data. So we're just double clicking here in the bottom right, and that's going to carry it through the rest of our table. And we need to update our calculation. So if we go to formulas, the formula tab, and click calculate now, it will update all of our values. We can also set our calculation option, so in the future it will do this for us to automatic. So I'm going to change this to automatic, and then in the future that will be done automatically. Now we want to replicate this VLookup for the federal per pupil expenditures, local, and total. So we'll set up our VLookup. So VLookup, and then in the parentheses we have to tell it what to go find. So go find the LEA number. We have to tell it to go to table, and we have to put a comma to start with the next one. So it's B2, comma. We're going to go to table 25 now. And again, start with column B because that's the column that needs to be matched with our B2 value. We're going to select from B to K. We're looking for federal now, and so federal is 5 columns over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's comma 5. And again, we want an exact match, so we're going to use false for the last term. And then as we hit enter, we'll have the federal per pupil expenditures excluding child nutrition. And again, double click in the bottom right of the cell and it'll carry that formula all the way to the bottom of our table. Next, we'll move on to local per pupil expenditures, again replicating VLookup. So equals VLookup, start our parentheses. We want to match based on the LEA number. We need to then separate that with a comma. We need to tell it to go find the LEA number in table 25. So we're going to select B through K. Now our local PPE is in column 7. So we're going to do comma 7. And we want an exact match. So we're going to type in false here. And again, double click in the bottom right to carry that to the very bottom. And finally, our total per pupil expenditures. We're going to do VLookup based on the LEA number. We're going to go to table 25, starting with the LEA number B through K. Now the total PPE is going to be in column 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So comma 9 and comma false because we want an exact match. And then double clicking here to carry this all the way to the bottom. And this completes. Now we've got a match between each of our PPE categories, both including and excluding child nutrition. The final way we're going to use this VLookup tool is now to do the subtraction to find the actual child nutrition expenditure. So we're going to do that by starting with the per pupil expenditures that include child nutrition and subtract off the value that excludes child nutrition. That difference will give us the child nutrition per pupil expenditures. And we want to find this for state, federal, local, and total child nutrition expenditure. So I'm going to create 4 new columns. First one being child nutrition PPE for the state, child nutrition PPE for the federal government, child nutrition PPE for the local system, and child nutrition PPE total. And then this calculation should be starting with the including child nutrition and subtracting off the excluding. So D2 minus L2 for the first one, F2 minus M2 for the second one for the federal. The local should be H2 minus N2, and the total should be J2 minus O2. Again, it's just equals J2 minus O2. And we can select all of these at once and right click in the bottom right, or double click in the bottom right of these, and we'll drag that formula all the way to the bottom of our table. One thing we'll notice is these values are formatted a little differently. So I'm going to select all of our data and put in a consistent border around them so it's consistent throughout the table. And one thing I like to do with the data, since these are all dollar values, is to use Excel's number formatting to apply the dollar sign here so that it's very clear that we are dealing with dollars for these. So the final outcome, what we use this VLookup value to do is to match tables 24 and 25, match the appropriate LEA from each of these tables, and then to calculate the child nutrition per pupil expenditures. So looking across the top row, we end up with, for instance, at Alamance Burlington Schools, the state government provides, on average, in the whole year 2015, $3.70 per pupil. The federal government provides $361.47 per pupil, and the local school system provides $149.09 for a total child nutrition per pupil expenditures in 2015 at Alamance Burlington Schools of $514.26. So what we're actually interested in with these two tables is actually to find the amount of child nutrition per pupil expenditures. So since we have information on the per pupil expenditures with child nutrition and without child nutrition, we can actually subtract these two values and determine what the child nutrition per pupil expenditures are. So we're going to use the VLookup function to combine these two tables so that we match everything correctly and see how we can subtract off the child nutrition included value, starting with it, subtract off the child nutrition excluded data. So as I mentioned in a previous lesson, I always like to keep the original data intact. And so I'm going to leave table 24 and 25 that are highlighted in red. And I'm going to start with table 24. I'm going to copy this worksheet. So I'm going to go move or copy. I'm going to create a copy and then move it to the end of the Excel file. And I'm going to rename it. And this is where I'm going to do my child nutrition per pupil expenditure data. And I usually designate red as my color for my original data, so I'm just going to choose another tab color for this one so it's different than my original data. Since I'm doing the analysis in this file, I'm going to remove or delete some of the information I don't expect to use. And one of the things I'm going to need to do in this file is to label each of the column headings with a more inclusive term, since we're going to combine the included child nutrition data and the excluded. So I'm going to rename each of these to say whether or not it includes or excludes the child nutrition data. So this is the state PPE including child nutrition. And I'm going to do the same thing on the federal PPE, the local PPE, and the total PPE. I don't expect I'm going to use the rank values, but I'm just going to hide them for now. So if you select the whole column, right click, and then hide, you can hide the rank information. So that way we can start with just bringing in the PPE information. The other thing we see is that Excel has cut off our full title, the including CN, and so we actually already have wrap text selected. We just need to drag this row a little bit larger so we can see our full heading. We can also make them a little bit wider, but generally it's helpful to have these a little more compressed so we can see more columns. But it is possible if you select each column, you can even select all of them at once and either right click and change the column width, or by dragging you can adjust those column widths. When you do this though, it does unhide your columns, so we need to rehide our ranking columns.